my name is Erich Prem. I'm the director of eutema, which is a Vienna-based strategic research consultancy. We work a lot in international research collaboration, and we have also been previously working in this area. So we had another project which already targeted research collaboration with Australia, and EPIC was kind of a new initiative. Now, EPIC is a project that targeted improved collaboration in the area of information and communication technologies between Europe on one side, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore on the other. And the reason why we wanted to target those countries was simply that these are very interesting countries for Europe to collaborate with, and they have very good historical relations. They have an excellent research base, not just in ICT, but also in ICT. And I think this is just a few of the reasons that make sense for Europe and Australia and New Zealand to collaborate. Formally, the European Commission issued a call for proposals, which was about collaboration with industrialized countries. And obviously, in the case of Australia and New Zealand, these are very good partners for Europe to collaborate with. But of course, the deeper underlying reason, and maybe even the personal reason, is that I think Australia and New Zealand are countries that are not always on the radar of researchers or research policymakers. And I think they are important partner countries for Europe. There is a lot that can be shared. There are many areas for collaboration. And also, of course, there are relatively strong ties between the people. I mean, Australia and New Zealand both are strong countries in terms of immigration, especially also immigration from Europe's member states. So there is a lot of ties between the countries, and all of this makes sense to foster the idea of improving collaboration between the two countries. And I think what EPIC did was, following the call, to create a dialogue between the countries, not just at a policy level, which isn't really our job, but really at research level. So what we tried to do was to bring together researchers in selected areas where we thought there is a strong interest on both sides to work together to address burning issues and to see what can be done in order to answer some of the current challenges in these fields. So what we did was we tried to identify some of those areas. I'll just name one that was pervasive. It's artificial intelligence. Of course, it's a very important topic now, but there were other topics such as e-research collaboration or collaboration on digitization, digital disruptions. So these were some of the topics. And in these areas, we tried to bring together researchers to discuss what the situation is, what the potential for collaboration is, and what are potential ways forward. And I really think that collaboration with these countries is very important for Europe. And you just need to look at the changing policy landscape in the world, at the global power shifts, if you like, to understand why now is a very good time to foster this kind of collaboration. The answer to this question really is that most of science has, to a certain degree, always been international, at least modern science. If you read descriptions of scientific developments in early physics, you will see how they exchanged letters and opinions and shared ideas and of course contradicted each other. So this discourse between researchers and scientists is inherently about ideas, about approaches, about understandings. So it doesn't reflect in any way country borders. Even during the Cold War, there was intense collaboration between researchers in, let's say, the United States and in Russia or Europe. So I think it has always been international. And the underlying reason is, of course, that researchers are always looking for collaborators who have similar ideas, or who have maybe even opposing views, or who have a piece of technology that they would know about in order to utilize in their own experiments. So it's really important for top researchers to always remain at the forefront of technology, at the forefront of knowledge, and this is the simple reason why. There is another reason which is more closely related to, let's say, industry. I mean, industry nowadays is really rather ignorant about country borders. I mean, there is so much demand, especially in technology, particularly in information and communication technology, that this kind of intense collaboration does not respect any country borders. Industry is looking for talent all over the world. And they are even setting up labs in other countries just for the very reason of attracting talent. And I think academic research is maybe even a little behind nowadays, because it is much more difficult for nation states to support, let's say, this kind of collaboration across country borders. If you think about it, it's much easier for industry, of course. So this international aspect, this international dimension, in a sense, is inherent in research, both academic research and industrial research. On the one hand, of course, there were the challenges within the project, and then, of course, there are the challenges that other researchers may be facing when they try to collaborate with partners, let's say, between partners from Europe and those in Australia and New Zealand. Let me answer the first ones first. So for the project, we could build on previous networks, on previous experiences, because we had already been involved in the project, as I mentioned. That, of course, facilitates things. But on the other hand, many of the organizations with which we had worked had changed. There were different directors. We even had to explain, because it took a very long time for the project to be finally funded. We even had to explain what the original purpose of the project was, and everybody had forgotten about the project idea. So that was one challenge. So it took some time to kind of restart the project, to get the new people on board. And of course, this is not made easier by the fact that you're working across very different time zones and over long distances. So in the end, I also ended up spending quite a bit of time in Australia and New Zealand, and we made an effort to bring Australians and New Zealanders to Europe when there were events, so that people could physically meet other people and talk about collaboration. So I think this challenge of distance is one that is, despite of all technology, despite of video conferences, it is still a challenge, and be it only because you have to agree on meeting times in very different time zones. A second is, of course, that the project, although it was about dialogue and very much also about scientific engineering dialogues, it still had an element of policy, and policy is always a bit tricky, because you need to understand how politicians think in a country, what's important for them, and that is not so easy. You know, they have to consider their own interest groups, while at the same time, of course, we are coming from a very different angle, from international collaboration, which may not be very high on some countries' agenda. So this is definitely a second challenge. In the case of Australia, it's also a bit complicated, because you have the federal government and you have the states, which I think has not been looked into sufficiently from the point of Europe. I think we need to understand that there is that some of the states are doing great things in research, for example, while at the federal government there is the general development of policies, and the two things, they're not necessarily out of sync, but they have different timing, let's say. So I think there is good opportunity for Europe also to collaborate with, I don't know, New South Wales or Queensland on certain aspects, which we tried to look into, which hadn't been done before enough, I think. New Zealand is a bit different because it's a smaller country and it is very open. We experienced it as very welcoming and really, I think they are kind of used because it's a small country surrounded by the sea. So they are really used to international collaboration. And so for us, that was kind of a little bit easier throughout the project. Throughout the project, throughout the EPIC project, of course, we talked to a lot of researchers in ICT, both in Europe, but also in Australia and New Zealand. And it was a big surprise that in our interviews, in our discussions, we learned how much interest there is in collaboration with Europe. But not just interest, there is, due to migration, basically, there are many expat researchers in Australia and New Zealand from Europe who are still, let's say, applying for European research funds, for example. So these people, they are like ambassadors in Australia and New Zealand. They know the rules. They even have a network of colleagues from Europe. And I think one easy recommendation to give is to talk to such people, talk to Europeans or to European expats who work in Australia and New Zealand and who are still maybe even involved in European research projects in case you're interested in collaboration with Europe. There is, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, there is quite a bit of funding available from many different sources. And of course, this is the challenge. The challenge is to find the right source of funding when you want to go beyond just peer-to-peer collaboration. Maybe let me start there. Peer-to-peer collaboration is something that is working very well. So I think that that's also something that on both sides that has been in place, as I said, for a very long time. Even before the advent of information and communication technologies, people have been exchanging letters, and there is a tradition of peer-to-peer collaboration at academic conferences. The problem starts, or it becomes a bit more difficult when you try to leverage collaboration to a more, let's say, group-to-group collaboration, or to go slightly beyond peer-to-peer. For example, involve your students, or maybe create a project that targets something bigger questions, bigger challenges. And I think here you really have to look into what's on offer from the European side at EU level. But just as I said, in Australia, you have the federal level and you have the states. Similarly, in Europe, you have the EU level, which means Brussels. And then you have the member states, and some of the European member states have excellent collaboration opportunities. There is Germany, a big country that invests a lot in research and also invests in collaboration with Australia and New Zealand. France does the same. France has a strong interest in research collaboration in Australia. And this is a challenge because there are so many offers, and of course, they always change from year to year, so that can be difficult. But there are people who you can ask. There are people overlooking this let's say this plethora of opportunities. Like, for example, EURAXESS is definitely one of them. People who know a lot about funding opportunities. But as I said, I think an important first step in your university, for example, may be to talk to colleagues from Europe. They may know a lot about it, or to go to conferences, talk to your colleagues in Europe. That's a first step. In previous research that we did, we also found out that these personal meetings are maybe sometimes underrated. It is important to meet people personally. Now, of course, currently with the COVID situation, that is particularly difficult, but it has always been difficult with Australia and New Zealand because it just takes basically a full day to get there. So whenever you want to physically meet, you have to invest a week. But we have learned that for very good projects, it is actually worth investing this time. You can then maybe work for up to a year remotely and without any physical connection, but make investments in regular meetings, commit to then also meeting online regularly if you really want to benefit from international research collaboration that is really long distance. In the EPIC project, we have also analyzed this a bit, and there are documents still available on the EPIC website, both addressing this kind of, let's say, the research funding maze, but also very practical recommendations for what researchers can and should do if they are interested in this kind of collaboration. Just my advice would be, don't get, as an Australian and New Zealand researcher, don't get, let's say, scared away by this, what seems to be a complete maze when you first look at the funding opportunities. It's all in the end, it's all understandable, and I'm sure it's easier than your field of research.